Hi there. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Nick McGeehan. I am the director of FairSquare, and thank you very much for attending this webinar, which is examining the conflict in Sudan, the UAE's role in that, and the extent to which their sporting interests may become something of an Achilles heel for them. A quick introduction for me. FairSquare is a UK-based NGO. We often work at the intersection of sport and rights. So we have a large body of work on the UAE, and we have a large body of work on its sporting interests, which include ownership of Manchester City in the UK. And so our involvement in this issue really related to observing the evidence that continued to mount of the role of the UAE in providing support to one of the two sides in the civil war that broke out in Sudan in 2023. We felt, based on the evidence that kept coming out from a vast number of reputable organizations, that it would be useful to call on the UK to investigate the role of the UAE in this conflict. The UK has already sanctioned multiple individuals related to both the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces. But we felt that given that some UK politicians had also spoken out and directly identified the UAE's Deputy Prime Minister, Sheikh Mansour Al-Nahyan, as somebody with UK assets who could potentially be targeted, we thought it would make sense to call on the UK to look at that in more detail, which we did on April 17th. Now, the important thing to say is we are not Sudan experts at all. But in the course of drafting this complaint, it became clear that there are a lot of outstanding Sudan experts with tremendous understanding of the nuances of the conflict, tremendous understanding of the country and its people. And so what we wanted to do with this webinar was to put journalists who are interested in this topic, but who might not know about it, in touch with these people, with these experts and these analysts. So I'm going to try and get out of the way as quickly as possible. We have on the panel today, we have Mohamed Osman, who's the Sudan researcher at Human Rights Watch, an organization that needs no introduction. We'd hope to have Niemat Ahmadi, who's the founder and president of the Darfur Women Action Group. We're still trying to get Niemat. We're hoping she'll join as soon as possible, but she's not here just now. Another woman panelist had also pulled out, unfortunately. We did our absolute best not to ensure that there was an all-male panel. I'm afraid that's what you have just now, but we hope to have Niemat on at some point. We also have Sasha Lezhnev, who's an investigator for the Sentry, which is a US-based group who's just done tremendous work looking at the UAE's links to the RSF. So I'm going to ask each panelist to give a very brief presentation to talk about this conflict and the role of the UAE in that conflict. After that, we'll have a Q&A. You should be able to put questions into the chat. Those will be relayed to me. I'll try to get to them to as many as I can. But without further ado, I think we'll hand over to Mohamed Osman. Again, Sudan researcher at Human Rights Watch. Delighted to have him on the panel today, someone with tremendous expertise on this situation. So over to you. Well.
Oh, thanks a lot, Nick, and thanks for our colleagues on the panel and also the attendees. I mean, I think maybe a very good start, just briefly, is setting the kind of the narrative about what's happening in Sudan. I think one of the main things that we have seen, how the conflict in Sudan being described as a civil war, which would suggest kind of like, people in Sudan woke up in the morning and decide to fight each other. That definition, that label denies the role and the responsibility, of course, of domestic actors for sure, the political dynamics in the country, but most importantly, the regional and the global interest, and particularly the UAE role in the conflict. The conflict in Sudan started in April 2023. Now we're entering, we passed the anniversary, a month after the kind of the outbreak of the conflict in April. So we're entering the fourth year of the conflict. I don't want to go into the numbers, but by far we know for sure, it's the world's biggest humanitarian crisis in terms of displacement, in terms of level of refugees, in terms of the level of destruction to infrastructure, access to healthcare, the famine and the risk of famine is spreading into many places as well. When people think about the humanitarian suffering in Sudan, they often look at it from a perspective of aid not getting in. I think importantly that part of our work is to shed a light about how this humanitarian suffering is quite connected to violations. And so many part of these violations are connected to the warring parties' disregard to the laws of war. And part of the disregard of the laws of war is connected to weapons. And then this is always the question about how the warring parties are getting weapons into Sudan. I mean, I think few days ago, we had the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights again warning about the spread use and increasing use of drones, particularly in Darfur and Kordofan. These types of sophisticated weapons were not present prior to the conflict. So it must be that external parties provided them. We reported 2 years ago in a report that named Fanning the Flames about the role of the UAE in terms of transporting weapons, particularly to the RSF. Of course, there are other countries that supporting the Sudanese armed forces, but the UAE role is not just weapons. I think we reportedly would say we'd go beyond to the political and the financial support to the RSF. This is an armed group that in 2023, I was in Eastern Chad, um, looking at the attacks of the rapid support forces in Guinea, the capital of West Darfur, where thousands and thousands of people were killed in April, we have seen in last year we have seen the rapid support forces doing another massacre, attacking civilians and others in El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, following 18 months of siege. We have continued to see the use of drones by the RSF attacking civilian infrastructure, including hospital, power stations, and all of that. So, of course, right. So, as we can talk about domestic actors, we definitely need to talk about the regional supporters of the rapid support forces. And should not be a conflict that should be the responsibility of the UAE as a bigger player. This is a conversation we heard a lot from diplomats that, we don't know what's happening. We can't find the smoking gun. But then you're like, well, we talk to them privately, but we're not seeing it change. So I think there is a moment when the international community should be put on notice and its responsibility to deter the UAE from continuing to support the atrocities committed by the RSF. So I will just stop here and then happy to come later as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed. That's fantastic. Yeah, outstanding outlining of the situation. As you were talking, Niemat has joined. Niemat, I'm not sure if you're ready and prepared to speak right away. If not, I could hand over to Sasha and Nick Donovan from the Sentry. But I see you there. Can you hear me, Niemat? I don't think you can. So I'm going to go to Sasha and Nick, and Niemat come in at the end. So Sasha, over to you from the Sentry.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. So Nick Donovan and I, senior investigator at the Sentry, we're going to tag team for just a moment from our side. So Nick, please, over to you.
Thanks. So we've published 4 reports on the relationship between the UAE and the Rapid Support Forces. So the first one was looking at the way that the UAE provides shell companies. So it provides its banking infrastructure and its corporate and legal infrastructure for the RSF to raise money. So one of these shell companies was accused of by the United States of buying gold. So when gold is smuggled out of Sudan, particularly Western Sudan, Darfur, via other countries, South Sudan, Chad, Libya, it then makes its way to Dubai and is bought by these shell companies. We discovered 3 more that were doing the same role in the supply chain, so buying it as it arrives off the plane. Also, we found other companies that were providing military equipment to the RSF, which were based in the UAE and had UAE businessmen as directors and shareholders, and in fact were running these companies. And they were doing so on behalf of the Rapid Support Forces leader, Ahmadi, and his family, particularly his younger brother, Al-Goni, who is the procurement chief. We did another report on the way that the family is provided a safe haven to live in luxury accommodation. They have a property portfolio worth 24 million, together with some of their advisors in Dubai, living very nicely, while around 11 million people in Sudan have lost their homes and have been forced to flee their homes. And finally, and probably most importantly, we did a report which was built on the reporting of Colombian journalists and people in organizations such as Human Rights Watch, who have interviewed lots of Colombian mercenaries who have returned home from fighting in Darfur. And their role was to be directly engaged in the fighting, but also to do training and to operate drones. And they told the Colombian journalists that they were recruited by a UAE-based company called GSSG, signing contracts with them. And we looked into the owner of GSSG, and we found that he was the long-term business partner of the UAE's most senior bureaucrat. So in Western terms, the equivalent of the White House Chief of Staff. And we think it's highly unlikely that this man would be freelancing, that he's some kind of rogue operator doing this without the permission of the UAE state. I mean, he essentially works for the leadership of the UAE. What happened after that is that many of the Colombian individuals and some Panamanian companies and Colombian companies were sanctioned, but none of the UAE personnel involved or the company involved were involved in being sanctioned. And it's an example of the sort of double standards applied to those participating in the war and fueling the war, is that certain entities and individuals are deemed untouchable by Western policymakers, particularly those in the UAE. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Nick. And I should have introduced our organization. So the Sentry is an investigative and policy organization, seeks to disable multinational predatory networks that benefit from corruption and conflict and repression, including kleptocracy, based in Washington, D.C. So I'm a senior policy advisor at the Sentry, been working on this region for 20 years plus. We're deeply, deeply concerned about the crisis in Sudan, where over 14 million people are displaced. The World Health Organization calls it the worst displacement crisis in the world. There's up to 10,000 child soldiers that are being used there as young as 10 and under. Over 19 million people are facing acute hunger and food insecurity, and entire communities are being bombed. And so, you know, as Mohamed and Nick outlined from their investigative reporting, the UAE is providing weapons and drones and financial support to the RSF, in an effort to basically cover this up and whitewash its image, it has been involved in quite a lot of what we would call sports washing. So trying to promote its image and make people forget in total that the UAE has spent over $4.5 billion on sponsoring sports teams and leagues around the world. It's really a significant figure when you take the sum total of that. So I'll just go through a couple of these, and you know, we can talk a bit more later in the Q&A. So the most prominent one is the one that Nick McGeehan highlighted at the beginning, that the purchase of a football team, Manchester City, was vying for the title and may win it again. They've spent over $2.5 billion in both purchasing the team from Sheikh Mansour, as well as sponsoring the team with the logo from Etihad Airways. They've spent 500 million. So football or soccer is the biggest effort where UAE is trying to sports wash its image. 500 million to sponsor Real Madrid, 330 million to sponsor Arsenal, 100 million to sponsor AC Milan. And then there's a number of other sports. It's really been involved in to try to cover up its image here. So it hosts the big finale to the Formula One car racing event, 640 million. It's involved with now the basketball leagues. So in the U.S., the NBA, 300 million, and it's also sponsored the New York Knicks. There's an Emirates NBA Cup now, NBA preseason games. Every NBA referee has Emirates on their jerseys. There's virtual logos if you watch on TV. And in Europe, the Euro League, $50 million. They're also involved in cycling. They have the UAE team, Emirates cycling team, $70 million. It spends $50 million to sponsor the ATP Tour for tennis, rugby, other cricket. The list goes on, really. And so I think what I also wanted to highlight, building on what Mohamed said, is that there is precedent for action here. That this is not a done deal. These are profitable business ventures, but they do not have to continue. So in the case of football, the UK government sanctioned former Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich, and then he was forced to sell the team. This may perhaps happen with Sheikh Mansour as well. Likewise, for other sports washing sponsorships, Arsenal and Bayern Munich earlier this year dumped Rwanda as a sponsor after the controversies surrounding its involvement and invasion of Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Just today, Arsenal is highlighting its new sleeve sponsor. So we will be doing a lot more on sports washing at the Sentry. We'll be starting a new campaign on the NBA next week about the NBA making the wrong call and pushing to end the Emirates deal. So with that, I will turn it over to Niemat. Thanks.
Thanks. And if I could just jump in quickly before Niemat comes on, just a reminder to people that please put questions into the Q&A if you have some. We've got some great ones coming through already. But yes, as Sasha said, Niemat Ahmadi from the Darfur Women Action Group. We talked, Niemat, just if I can set this up for you, we've talked a lot about sport just there, but could you bring this back to the people of Sudan and the people of Darfur? How is this thing impacting them? I think a lot of people on the call would really like to hear about that situation as you're hearing it.
Thank you. I would like to thank the organizer. It's really with a heavy heart that I join you this morning with the sad news of passing of one of our dedicated social worker and frontline humanitarian aid leader in South Kordofan. Today, she, as a result of shelling of the rapid support forces. So you can imagine, as we talk right now, the escalated violence, shelling is going on. I think there hasn't been enough attention being put on the United Arab Emirates and its role. As the crisis move out of Khartoum and the center of Sudan, unfortunately, it is heavily concentrated in Darfur, South Kordofan, and West Kordofan. These are the places that are not talked about it much, but people are forced out of their homes. Systematic shelling to civilian inhabitant areas. It is including shelling of internal displaced camps. And the recent trend has been really dangerous. They recently also have arrested women in Niala, activists who just gathered to talk about women issues. And until today, we don't know their whereabouts. And as of now, South Kordofan in many different areas are currently under fire. People sending all these images and videos out of the attack by the rapid support forces. And they, in the work of the attack in Al-Fashir, they have abducted large number of people, including women. They took them to Niala, but many of them have yet to be released. And news coming out is not so good. It's that these people are living under undescribable conditions. Some of them pass, and they remain there in the detention with the people, and that there is not much outrage or talk about this. It's very unfortunate, but it is difficult enough to say, like we have seen the genocidal massacre in Al Junaina. It has been repeated in Zamzam camp, in Abu Shuk, and in Al Fashir. Attack on women was reported in the noon of the day of the attack. Abduction, large number of women have been abducted and put in a very in unbelievable conditions where they have been forced to render domestic service, sexual slavery, forced marriages, and killing children have been the most impacted. And news coming also of this plane that carrying ammunition, machine guns and drones and advanced technology to Niala Airport coming every day. And there are other planes that are going, crossing North Darfur toward like northwest part of Darfur. God knows where they are going, but it looks like right now the conflict is re-emerging even in those areas that remain stable throughout this conflict. We have seen recent attack in the Blue Nile, and the Blue Nile has the largest number of displaced coming from Khartoum, from Darfur, from South Kordofan and other areas. So the conflict is getting really worse by the day and night, but it is not much outrage and there's not much attention being put. And I can't emphasize enough that this has to be exposed to the world, and that has to be especially the role of the United Arab Emirates while their citizens living in absolute prosperity, and they are putting the citizen of Sudan through this. We Accountability has to be, and we must do more to expose them. And I think this campaign will be the most important one in putting them on notice, but a lot more need, and especially media coverage and media attention is needed now more than ever.
Thank you, Niemat. And I'm so sorry to hear about your colleague today in South Kordofan. Must be tremendously upsetting and difficult to continue the work that you do in those circumstances. There's some good questions coming in, but I wanted to quickly take a sort of privilege and just ask a very basic question of whoever would like to answer it, really. Why is the UAE doing this? I think there's a lot of people in the call who might not really understand. What are the UAE's interests here? What are their motives here? Is it just the gold that's coming out, or is there something beyond that? And then in terms of the extent and significance of their involvement, what would happen if the UAE stopped putting weapons into Sudan right now? What would be the impact of that? I'll open that to, I don't know, Mohamed, maybe you want to have a first stab at that. I'd love to hear your views too, and Niemat, and obviously all the panelists.
I mean, I think there is a history of Sudan and the Gulf countries in particular. I mean, looking at the political economy of war. I mean, it was interesting to remember that in the last months of Omar al-Bashir, the Sudan last ruthless dictator, the UAE that used to bail him out in terms of debt refused to do so. And that definitely was of the contributions of like him not being able to continue his crackdown or to continue to create any legitimacy within his party, to continue ruling. The UAE had always eyed the Red Sea ports. There have been a lot of issues with the workers' unions refusing any sale of the national ports in Port Sudan, and then later Sawakin, which is in the same line in the Red Sea. The EU was always interested into the land. There's actually, I think it's years ago, but there's a food security vision the UAE put out, and it's online in terms of how they see also their access to food. And we have seen it, particularly, going back to the war in Yemen as well, right? That reason why the Rapid Support Forces has been significantly empowered by these regional actors is definitely linked to the war in Yemen because of the UAE wanted to have the Rapid Support Forces, and people would just join because it's just money. So there's definitely an earlier connection that the UAE had. But the UAE also had relationship with some of the civilian politicians at the same time, who were part of the transition between 2019 and 2021. So there is the link there. There's linkages there. I mean, the former Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, who is now the leader of the Sumud Alliance, which is an alliance of civilian parties, reportedly for quite some time is still based in the UAE, among other actors as well with that alliance. So the connection is absolutely there. I'm just coming to the point. I mean, sorry, I forgot the last part of the question.
Just how significant are they? What would happen if they stopped putting weapons in?
So I would just quickly say, yeah, exactly. So I know one of our great colleagues, Nathaniel Raymond from the Yale lab, will always have this answer, like if President Trump picked up the phone, told the UAE, don't send weapons to Sudan, we will see the significance. I think we had days when the war in the Gulf started with Iran and when the UAE was, shot. And we've seen the rockets and the bombing in Iran and in the UAE. And prior to that, when Saudi Arabia and UAE went into fighting in Yemen, we have seen less and less weapons supplies. We have seen less violations happening. So yes, so there's definitely, if leaders can pick up the phone, call the UAE leadership, saying don't do this or there are consequences, we probably will see a different version of the conflict.
Right. Okay. So hugely significant, I guess, is the short answer to that. And that I think you answered that question really perfectly. So I'm going to just shift over to Niemat and bring back to something you mentioned. Niemat, you talked about the conflict not getting the attention that it deserves. It certainly, in a chat earlier with Mohamed, we were talking about the difference between the coverage of the genocide in Gaza and the genocide in Sudan, which is there. I just wondered if you had any perspectives on why this conflict is not getting the coverage that ultimately it does deserve, given the gravity of the abuses and the sheer numbers of people who are being affected in disastrous ways.
Yeah, it is very unfortunate that the crisis in Sudan, as worse as it is, but like it doesn't get the coverage. And I think the reason is that Middle East has been the priority for the Western government, Western leaders, and that is where like the focus and emphasis goes. And mostly like crisis in Africa doesn't get that much attention. But also the issue is that it's not the lack of information. Like what is really like surprising is that the perpetrators themselves are the one who document the crimes and broadcast themselves committing these crimes. So it is not hard to find the information, but also from the civilian side, people are so terrified, like nobody can allowed to take a picture, take information. When people are suspected and arrested by the rapid support forces, they immediately be killed. And I think I cannot agree with Mohammed that if today the UAE stop what they're doing, we will see immediately the attacks stop, because they are literally surviving in a paycheck by the UAE. It's like the funding, the weapon. And we even saw recently in the work of the war in Iran and the intensity of it and its impact in the UAE, we have seen less supply, but also we have seen some leaders of the RSF defected and joined SAF, which is not a good idea, because either way they are perpetrators here and there. But that kind of one of the immediate impact that you can see. And I think, as Mohammed said, so the crisis in Sudan has been going on for years, and especially in the US, previous leaders have failed. And I think President Trump has that opportunity to resolve this crisis if they can pick a call and talk to their to the United Arab Emirates. But I will also say, if the United Arab Emirates stop supplying weapons or supplying or dealing with the RSF, we will see less women being raped. We'll see less children dying as the result of malnutrition. We will see less civilians die in silence and less destruction, especially in the areas that like historically marginalized, conflict affected, like Darfur and South Kordofan. This will be immediately reflected on the ground.
Thank you, Niemat. That's very insightful. I'm going to turn to, I think perhaps Sasha and Nick, this would be a question for you that came in. What says, why are sports institutions like the NBA, the NFL, and Manchester City being targeted as pressure points? And is there evidence that this strategy is having any effect on policymakers in Abu Dhabi? Just some context to that, I think it was the Tom Lantis Commission in the US, in the Congress earlier this week, wrote to the NBA and the NFL and called them to cut ties with the UAE on account of their links to the RSF atrocities in Sudan. So that's some context for anyone who doesn't know that. But yeah, maybe this is a good one for the Sentry. Why this shift to sport where the UAE is concerned, and is there any sign it's going to be effective?
I think the UAE made a strategic choice about a decade ago to shift from, or maybe 15 years ago or so, to shift from just an oil hub to more of a tourism business, global power hub. And it decided as part of that to lower all of its standards for gold. And we can talk a bit more about gold. Gold is a hub. UAE is a massive, it's probably the world's largest hub for illicit gold from Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, basically countries where there's huge volumes of illicit gold. Over $4 billion of Sudanese gold was imported to the UAE, and even more from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's ongoing conflict as well. And so as part of this shift in strategy, the UAE decided to try to build up its brand much more through tourism, through the Emirates Airlines, Etihad Airways, etc., and really get into the heads of Western influencers and consumers, and really brand itself. And the word brand is very, very important here. It's the perception, it's the value that people associate with a certain company or country, and Emirates Fly Better is emblazoned on the logos of all those football teams that I mentioned, and indeed it's a luxury airline. So people have been getting this image in their head of, well, the UAE is luxurious. It has a lot of sun. It's a great place to do business. You can bank there, etc. It's not just an oil hub in the Gulf, like some other countries, and so it's been pretty successful and profitable from that standpoint. And yet, at the same time, the UAE is doing exactly what Mohamed and Niemat and Nick just said, and the United States and other countries are in large part turning a blind eye to this, as Nick, my colleague, mentioned. The U.S. sanctioned all these Colombian mercenaries, but none of the UAE networks that have been very squarely supporting them. So it's really time for the United States, the UK, the European Union to take much stronger action on that and cut off some of those illicit networks. I will say that in recent weeks, the U.S. really turned the page a bit in sanctioning UAE business networks and banking networks that were supporting Iran. So they certainly are aware of these illicit networks within the UAE, and it's simply a choice of picking, the Iran conflict or the Sudan conflict in this case. Thanks.
Thank you, Sasha. Another great question coming in from Jamie Gardner, a name I recognise. Does sufficient evidence exist in the panelist's opinion for the UK government to sanction Sheikh Mansour, or to threaten with sanction if support for the RSF does not stop? Nick Donovan, I don't know if this is an issue that you've looked into in great detail, the precise involvement of Sheikh Mansour. Is that something that you'd be comfortable speaking to?
The New York Times, which has impeccable sources, named Mansour as the holder of the Darfur file. And the UAE is an autocratic country. So Sheikh Tahnoun, the National Security Advisor, MBZ, these three men, nothing gets done in the UAE without their say-so. So whether there's enough evidence or not, there's certainly enough evidence for the UK to speak out, to say plainly that the UAE should stop arming, funding, buying gold on behalf of the RSF. And then they can look into the investigations and see whether there's sufficient evidence to meet that threshold. But the first step is to publicly acknowledge what's going on, rather than mealy mouth say stuff behind closed doors and then say nothing in public.
Yeah. I mean, if I could just add something to that, I think that's absolutely it, right? Like, he's also the head of the banking sector, Sheikh Mansour, in the UAE, so he has oversight of everything there. I think the best piece of evidence yet connecting Mansour to the RSF is the New York Times reporting, where they noted that he had control or controlling influence over two of the entities that set up field hospitals in Chad, where it was very clear that weapons were being run into RSF hands. There's a whole load of other circumstantial evidence pointed to Mansour's involvement. He oversaw talks between rebel groups in 2019. He met General Ahmadi, the head of the Rapid Support Forces, 7 weeks before the Civil War broke out. He's the head of Sky News, or his entity controls Sky News Arabia, which has been identified as essentially publishing, RSF propaganda, really. So yeah, I tend to align completely with what you say there, Nick. That there is enough for them to go at and look at them in detail.
And those Colombian mercenaries that I mentioned, Conflict Insights Group, run by a guy called Justin Lynch, has been tracking the phones of some of these Colombian mercenaries. And you can see the phones starting off in Colombia, going to the UAE, being trained or spending a lot of time in a UAE state-owned military base, and then being deployed via Libya to Darfur. So the question is, if this is a rogue operation or there's no state complicity, is why would these Colombian mercenaries be on that military installation?
Right. Yeah, it's a tremendous piece of research. I think it came out 10 days ago, maybe a bit longer. So Conflict Insights Group. Yeah, maybe we can stick it in the chat. Another question, which again, I'll just leave this open. To what extent does the UAE use online discourse to achieve its political aims? And how many influencers are on its payroll? Is there anyone on the panel who'd like to answer that one? Nobody jumping in?
Sorry, I was looking at Sasha just to see if felt like they wanted to answer the questions.
Feel free to jump in.
No, I mean, I don't have an answer, so I would do the lawyer thing about trying to shift a bit of yeah. I mean, I think that definitely a lot of the reports around the influencers be promoting UAE. I mean, being mentioned throughout this conversation how the UAE is very good with the marketing and the branding, so it's there. I think the risk that a lot of the Sudanese activists been mentioning is seeing Sudanese politicians being the influencers in terms of promoting kind of the UAE narrative. I mean, one of the main narratives we have been seeing is who shot the first bullet in the war in Sudan on April 15, 2023. And I think the kind of the counter answer is who shot the 5,000 bullet after that. So that the first bullet question doesn't really matter anymore, as now we are in this war. But we're definitely seeing it. We're definitely seeing, I mean, I'm looking into some of the Arabic speaking, UAE podcasts, and Sudan comes up, and it's definitely inviting specific Sudanese figures and faces, but it's definitely about obfuscating the UAE from any responsibility in the conflict, and why we're even involved in a conflict. We don't care. We don't have any sides we support in the conflict. So just so that's just one thing I see from the side of the influencers.
Yeah, it's a very good report by Marco and Jones, who wrote about UAE influencers online, which we can perhaps stick in the chat. Niemat, I want to read out one of the questions that just came into the chat, and just get your response to this. The comment says, I think it's important for the discussion to apply the same level of scrutiny to all external actors involved in Sudan's conflict. There is frequent attention on alleged UAE support for the RSF, often linked to economic interests such as gold. However, there is far less discussion about Egypt's backing of the Sudanese armed forces and the strategic and economic interests that tie to that relationship as well. Many Sudanese feel that outside powers or whether supporting the RSF or the SAF are contributing to the continuation of the conflict in pursuit of regional influence and access to Sudan's resources. A balanced conversation should acknowledge the role of all foreign actors, not focus selectively on one side. I wonder, would you like to have any response to that comment, the accusation that there's a lack of balance in what we're talking about here?
Thank you. I would like to add to what Mohamed said, about the influencers and the media and online scrutiny. There is another line of defense for the UAE is that Sudanese either living in the United Arab Emirates or living in the West, who have been lobbying behind the scene on behalf of the UAE. And at some point, we heard allegation that someone was flown from the US in the work of European Union, the tough meeting about whether they include UAE in the resolution or not. So that is how deep it is. And these are like people, including the Tasis government, like most of the leaders are living in the West, like the UK, the US, and other countries. So that also is that it is an opportunity for sanction, for accountability, for universal jurisdiction, name it, because these people are very much involved with that, and they need to be put on notice and also limit their ability to do so. In terms of external actors, of course, we advocate strongly of all external actors to cease support to those who are fighting in Sudan. But to say the least, it's obvious that the impact of the UAE is the biggest. We have seen, like in many instances, like for instance, Darfur right now, there is no place that is controlled by SAF, but solely controlled by the rapid support forces. In the work of the fall of Al-Fashir, the army withdrawn, but the civilians who were left there were completely massacred and murdered by the RSF. If they are saying they are for the civilians, they should not have killed the civilian or destroyed the infrastructure. So that argument is of course true, but to advocate against all external actors, but it's obvious that the biggest role in destruction and this and the massacre of the people in Sudan, particularly in Darfur and Kordofan, is the UAE. Right now, with the join of SPLM North leader to TAF, we have seen the result of this escalated attack and expanded attacks. And it's obvious that they're using these drones and all this advanced technology and that are supplied by the UAE. So I think the UAE has the biggest share in the destruction and the continuation of this conflict, but not to say that others are not involved, but we advocate against all external access. But I think the UAE has the most stake here.
I just want to further this question, Paul's question about the influencers. I mean, you know, I think we all remember when the internet was just the days of the Wild West. Anyone could do anything, and it was almost equal. These days, and particularly on this issue, the UAE has really tilted the scales using influencers. It's a huge part of their strategy. Influencers are paid, up to $50,000 per post if they're large enough. Emirates Airlines has over 1 million followers. Instagram, TikTok. And so this is a big part of their strategy. And if you search for Dubai tourism, Sudan is not going to come up. You have to search specifically for Sudan, and then some individuals like ourselves and small organizations, post some videos, etc. Avaz did a very good creative thing in London last year that went somewhat viral, but that was pretty much the only thing. So this influencer thing is really strong, and that's something we are going to counter with our sports washing campaign coming up, and hope to work with as many influencers as possible who are interested in ending the destruction and genocide that are happening in Sudan. Thanks.
Thanks, Sasha.
A few words to say about The danger of the UAE involvement, we understand that the rapid support forces have mercenaries that are coming from various countries. This is a danger that the international community may not see right now, but at some point they will be forced to respond, but it will be too late because the RSF has militias coming from 7 different countries: Chad, Central African Republic, Mali, Niger, as far as Mauritania, fighting in Sudan. Some of these groups are also affiliated with terrorist group in West Africa. But there is a talk that some of the RSF influencers are using about the Islamists. Actually, the Islamists is splintered into 2. There is a group of Islamists that are leading RSF right now. So it's not that all like in that side. So that also another thing to look for. And then the fact that this is becoming like a multinational, a regional troops that coming across, and then being the fact that Sudan is bordered with all these fragile states, it is dangerous that this is not going just to remain in Sudan if this allowed to continue, but it will spill over to the entire region, and it will pose like there will definitely eventually be the development of grown like terrorist group that going cross borders, and that would be an international security issue. It's not just regional or local in Sudan. And that is something that I think it's very important and it's not much talk about, but it is really serious.
Yeah, that was something that came up in the sort of looking at, researching this, was just the possibility for a sort of regional conflagration with the UAE bringing in more and more weapons from neighboring countries. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Niemat. And I want a question come in from David Romero Gonzalez, which I think is an interesting one and worth sort of putting to the panelists. How is the West behaving in terms of legitimizing the UAE, and more specifically the continuation of the war in Sudan? To what extent should we be talking about the role of Western governments here?
I mean, if I can come quickly on that question, I mean, it's definitely has been an issue. I mean, and I'm sure it's been mentioned throughout the conversation as well, that we were always told that we are talking to the UAE privately. We don't believe in the public naming and shaming because it doesn't work. What we are seeing almost 4 years in this conflict, that it's not, the private conversation doesn't really work. And we know for sure they're not really actually confronting them. We always ask about information intelligence. These are governments who have intelligence services. They probably have more information than us. So there is a lack of interest for different reasons. Of course, the Ukraine war and then the Gaza war influenced that. Now comes the question of what can be done. You have a UN arms embargo since 2000 and 2004, 2005 on Darfur. There's no implementation for the UN arms embargo. As also been mentioned, I think from Nick and Sasha as well, right? The hypocrisy around you sanction the Colombians, but you didn't sanction the UAE, who actually, orchestrated the whole operation. So this is other things that could be done now. In late February, there is a coalition which is named Atrocity Prevention Coalition being formed that has, I think, Ireland and the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, Norway as well. This is a coalition that is designed to prevent atrocities in Sudan. So what are they doing to prevent atrocities? I mean, one direct thing is preventing weapons supplies, preventing the UAE, and of course, right, other countries also being involved in this conflict, preventing them from profiting from the conflict or supporting the warring parties and their atrocities.
I would just highlight as well that during his confirmation hearing in the Senate, that Secretary of State Marco Rubio highlighted that he was very concerned about the Sudan genocide, which he called a so-called real genocide, and would work on this as Secretary of State, and that this is an issue that needs to be highlighted to the UAE specifically. Said that, and yet U.S. action has not really followed that path. I think I would highlight two things that really need to take place now. Number one is go after some of these illicit networks, like the ones that Nick, my colleague, highlighted, of collaborating with the Colombian mercenaries, and follow in the footsteps of the actions that were taken on the UAE financial network supporting Iran recently. I think the other one is related to illicit gold. This is an opportunity for the US to really help tighten the screws on the illicit gold trade that goes through the UAE. Working to investigate and sanction the illicit gold networks. There's been a little bit of that happening, but not nearly enough. And working with the UK government that's organizing an illicit finance summit coming up on the 23rd, 24th of June, to set up, and gold is going to be a huge part of that, to set up a monitoring and validation system for the UAE and other big gold trading hubs globally, to really monitor and check and validate or invalidate them as properly conducting customs verification and other checks on gold, and then potentially cutting them out from the gold market if they are not. So those are some pretty big opportunities, I think, at play right now.
Thank you, Sasha. A question came in about, again, going back to the sports issue, and Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola has spoken out very passionately about Palestine and has mentioned Sudan. And they've asked, what would your message be to him? What would you like him to do? Is it fair to ask him to do any more? I'm going to take that question before I go back to the panelists for a quick roundup before we close, because we only have 7 minutes left. I think Guardiola is very interesting. I think it is reasonable to ask him to speak out more on Sudan. He is clearly a man with a conscience and a man of principle. He has yet to apply that scrutiny to his owners, who are effectively fueling this genocide and this slaughter and these atrocities that we've heard about today. I do think it's incumbent on him to speak out about that. I think it's great that he speaks out against Palestine, but given who his owners are, I think he should say something about this. I think he probably might want to say something about this. So if there are any journalists on the call, I think there's a question to be asked of Pep Guardiola about who his owners are and how he feels about that. Now, we've only got 6 minutes left. I just want to go around the panelists again. I want to, first of all, thank you all for your time and coming on. I want to thank everyone who's attended for taking time to hear about this issue from these experts. If I could just go around each of you, and if you could just give a sort of closing thoughts, if you will, from what you've heard today. What do you think are the key things that people need to take away from this call, key pieces of information that people need to be looking at? I'll leave it to you all. So if we maybe start with Nick, and then we'll go to Sasha, and then Mo, and then we'll leave it to Niemat to close.
So I've been reading a lot of the comments. A lot of them have the underpinning question that should we be applying only pressure on the UAE, with some insinuation that there's a sort of unfair focus. What I would say is we should apply equal scrutiny to all of the armed actors and to all of the external actors, but where the facts on the ground indicate that the violations of the war, of human rights abuses and the laws of war are primarily and most heavily being committed by certain actors, we should call that out. And it's only the RSF which was responsible for what happened in El Fasher, which the UN said bore the hallmarks of genocide. That's why we're on screen today. I want to cede the rest of my time to my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Nick. Sasha?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Nick, for organizing, and for all of you journalists for attending. This is pretty amazing. I would just say that, I think we're all waking up to this idea of sports washing now. It's a pretty new concept, and we plan to do a lot more on this to help spread the truth, the awareness of this issue and what's happening in Sudan and other places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, and link it to the teams and leagues that we all know and love, and so people can be aware of what's actually happening. And I hope that will change some things. And I think with these recent actions on from Arsenal and Bayern Munich on Rwanda, that there's real precedent for actually turning things around in Chelsea. So I really hope that we can have more responsible sponsorships of sports teams and leagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. Mohamed.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, as maybe mentioned earlier, I mean, there's always times when we talk about Sudan and people leave with that kind of long faces that we can't do something. We can always do something. I think especially for journalists, policymakers, anyone who can have a voice. I mean, at least in the UK, write to your MPs, address Sudan, raise these issues, campaign. There is an amazing Sudanese community that you can always reach out to. We are there. So I think it's important to keep things in the public and not feel despair that we cannot talk about Sudan and there's nothing going to change. There is something can change. And hopefully this conversation can be a starting point to like feeling like we can at least do something about it. We can at least speak about something. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed. Niemat.
Well, thank you. I will continue what Mohamed just said. I think it is very important to this kind of exposure, and facts need to come out, and also the media consistently covering this, but targeting individual with economic ties with UAE and also political ties as our leaders, but giving citizens more information to know. I think if we can mobilize citizens, like campaigning, educate more the general public, they will put pressure on their own political leaders, representatives, especially here in the United States. People can mobilize, grassroots mobilization, writing to Congress. We have seen in the early Darfur crisis how people mobilize. We are missing that right now, and we want to see something like that. And as Mohammed said, we can't lose hope. There is always hope that there can be a solution. And as I remember in an event by where Senator Warner has spoken, that it is a best place for President Trump to get a Nobel Peace Prize is Sudan, because this has been going on for years. If he can take that phone call and exercise pressure in their own friends, that would be the biggest breakthrough in the life of the people of Sudan. It's, yes, of course, the solution for the Sudan crisis lies on the people of Sudan, but also this external huge factor, if it is being removed, then that it's up to the people of Sudan to take it to the next level. So I think it's really important, but also looking at the regional aspect of it, and then those in the West who are like playing as a line of defense for the rapid support forces, and the UAE need also to be put in notice and investigating potential of money laundering and other things like that. Also, they can be implicated. And I know under the US and the UK law, nobody involved in like war crimes or crimes against humanity or genocide are allowed or admissible, but these people are living in this country, some of them having citizenship. So that is also an opportunity to look for, to exercise pressure, because these are the line of defense for the RSF that is very, in the very moment, is killing and massacring people on the ground. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Niemat. Thank you all to the panelists. Thank you for giving up your time and your expertise. It's hugely appreciated. Thank you to all the attendees for giving up your time to listen to this. It's obviously, it needs no repeating. It's an incredibly important subject. Every column inch dedicated to this will be of use in increasing the pressure to end what's happening in Sudan. So thank you all. If you want the email addresses of any of the panelists today, feel free to reach out to us. We'll reach out to them. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you about the work that they're doing and to connect you to others. So thank you again, and good afternoon.